Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. Each week, I'm sharing stories from my path and using the power of conversation and collaboration with my many great guests. Together, we chart a course toward understanding, bridging divides, and fostering a community where wisdom prevails over discord. Friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. The only good thing about a bad attitude is we have the ability as individuals to change it. For me, it starts with gratitude and personal accountability. I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Please remember to subscribe and share the DTH podcast with your network of friends. If you would like to support the show, check out the Support Us page on the D-Rate the Hate website. With that, my friends, let's get to it. Friends, as you well know, having conversations on contentious topics, while very necessary, can be very difficult to do. Having conversations on contentious topics with people who disagree with us is even more necessary and even more difficult to do. So when my friend Julian Adorney, who you all well know, he's guest hosted for me several times, asked if he could have a conversation about DEI, which is a topic that he's written about several times, have that conversation about DEI with his friend Abby Benedetto, who is a DEI instructor and educational consultant from Core Shifts, I thought it was a fantastic idea. After listening to that, while there's many things within this episode that I disagree with, I thought it was a fantastic conversation and a true example, a fantastic example on how to have a conversation about a contentious topic where both people are coming away feeling as if they were heard and they got their points across and they truly had a beautiful and curious conversation. So friends, do not miss this conversation with Julian Adorney and Abby Benedetto from Core Shifts. Here we go.
Hey everyone, this is Julian Adorney, filling in as guest host for Wilk, my good friend. I am absolutely thrilled for this conversation, to bring this conversation to you guys. This is one that I've kind of been sscheming over and planning for a long time. It didn't quite work out until now, and I'm so excited to finally show this to you guys. This is the second in a series of conversations I'm calling the Difficult Conversations series, which is kind of a homage to Peter Coleman and his Difficult Conversations lab. And the idea is that we're going to pick a topic that we disagree with on pretty strongly, and instead of having a debate or something like that, where I win, you lose, you win, I lose, we're going to walk through it and kind of model a discussion in a really respectful and humble way. And so I'm really excited. You guys are going to get to follow along in real time through all kinds of moments, through all kinds of oh, I never thought of it that way moments, or wow, I didn't realize your side thought this. That's actually cool. I agree with this moments, or even moments where it's okay, we still walk away disagreeing, but there's a lot more nuance on your side. And also, your side isn't quite the caricature that I thought it was. And so there's a lot more humanity there than there was at the beginning of the conversation. So my guest, Abby Benedetto, I'm so happy to have you on. Can you tell the audience a little about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you for suggesting this and sort of creating the opportunity. I think that what you just described is exactly what I think we both sort of are hoping for in the world, in some ways, of just how can we talk across difference, across different ideologies, different perspectives, different lived experience, in a way where we're having a true conversation and a true dialogue, rather than just trying to convince the other person to think what we think. Yeah. And I've enjoyed our conversations prior to this. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm nervous. I don't really know what to expect. But I think this is what I am here to do. So my name is Abby Benedetto, and I am an educator by sort of career and passion. I've been working in education for the last 2 decades. And I think that something that has become really clear to me is that part of part of my life's work is not just about education. It's about how can we create more just and liberated places in the world, and what is my role in that as a white woman. So I'm really here to sort of talk about anything related to that with you.
Wonderful. And yeah, one of the reasons I'm so excited for this conversation is we share that goal. We share that goal of a just and liberated world, but we come at it from different techniques, different strategies. You're very well. I'm very publicly opposed to a lot of DEI stuff. I've written about this for Quillette, for Washington Examiner, for Epoch Times, a lot of things. And not to say that I'm right, but just like that's kind of where I'm coming from. And you're very pro DEI from our conversations. In fact, I think you incorporate DEI into a big part of what you do for a living. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. So I thought we could start out. What do you see as the value proposition of DEI? Like, what do you think it adds to the table that we've been missing in the past, 20, 30, 40, 200, 2,000 years? Like, why do we need it? What's essential about it?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And, I think it's so interesting that I feel like this, well, I think this has always been true, but I think in the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, some of this language has just become so provocative, right? So even the 3 letters DEI is another set of acronyms that I think conjures up sometimes vastly different perceptions or vastly different emotions based on where people are coming from. So I think that, yes, I believe deeply in the benefit and the need for DEI. In terms of the way that I think about it, or the way that I come to the table, is just how can we have conversations and learning experiences in which people of all identities and lived experiences can learn more about what it's like to have a different lived experience or identity, with this the goal or having that be in service of how can we move together in this beautifully multicultural and diverse world that we live in ways where we are more inclusive of difference, that we are more aware of sort of any biases or mindsets that we are coming in that might be getting in the way of us connecting with other humans, and again, doing work together that I think is connecting rather than dividing.
That makes a ton of sense. I really love what you said initially about, DEI has become kind of a label, right? And it has a specific meaning depending on has a different meaning depending on who you ask, including, I would imagine, some DEI practitioners, because I'm not sure that you would agree with everything that Robin DiAngelo is saying. I'm not sure she would agree with everything David Glasgow is saying. And then you look at someone on the other side, like Chris Rufo, and it's like, well, neither of you guys agree with him, And so maybe it's better to just like kind of like drop the acronym and just sort of talk about ideas, Maybe that's one way to kind of diffuse everything.
I think that's right, because I think, as we know, specifically in relation to sort of DEI work, I think sometimes the acronyms then become a little bit of like a smokescreen for associations or meanings that people are attaching to those acronyms without naming that explicitly. So either we're talking past each other and not knowing it, or we're using these acronyms and we're weaponizing them in ways to try to sort of like prove the other side wrong, or something, whether it's sort of like adversarial directly or not.
I think that's exactly it. I think we are prone to weaponizing this quite a bit. So with that in mind, I want to kind of dive into one of the things we've talked about in the past, which is this very concrete idea, leaving labels aside, this very concrete idea of dedicated spaces for people of different ethnicities, different backgrounds. I think they're called affinity spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we've talked about, in colleges, some universities are having different graduations for people of different ethnicities or backgrounds. Some high schools are having, have proposed ideas like different classes and stuff like that. And I have my own thoughts on that, my own concerns about that and stuff like that. But what do you see as the benefits of that? Like, what does that bring to the table that was missing before?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because it's interesting. I think that when I talk about my own journey, my own journey of learning as a white person in this country, I think like probably the first time I experienced an affinity space with other white people was maybe 10 years ago. It was a while ago, and it was not a positive experience for me. It was like awkward and uncomfortable, and I didn't really know why we were there. It was through my job. And I just remember being like, this feels really icky, and it wasn't something that I found value in. But I think over time, I have come to really both value and now am a person who sort of holds affinity space for other white people. Like, I believe deeply in it. And I think in talking with folks from different racial identities, I've learned or heard stories about the power that they have experienced in affinity space. So when I describe affinity work to other people, I always say that I believe as a white person in affinity work because it's a safe place for me to learn and push my thinking without feeling like I have to perform. Meaning like I have to not make a mistake, or I have to sort of figure out how to do things when there's a group across difference. But it also allows me to learn without doing additional or unintentional harm. So if I'm doing that learning with folks of color or with folks of people who hold different identities, then in my learning process, I'm probably going to make some mistakes. And when I do that in an affinity space with other white people, I don't have to then worry about what impact those mistakes might have on other people. So I think for white folks, it's a place where we can push ourselves, learn, do so in a way that feels safe enough for us to sort of play around and not do unintentional harm. For folks of color, I think that what I've heard from people, and again, I don't want to be anybody who pretends to speak for people of color, right? Because I don't know that lived experience. But for the people that I talk to, those affinity spaces can be spaces of healing. They can be spaces where folks of color don't have to explain themselves, right? When you think about when you are just hanging out with your family, right? And for many of us, our family, we have all the shorthand. We don't have to explain something. We can be like, oh, remember Mr. Johnson? And everybody knows who Mr. Johnson was. And we don't have to tell the whole story, right? Affinity space is kind of like that, I think, for people of color, in that they don't have to explain their lived experiences because many of the people who are in the room are going to understand that shorthand. And so then beyond that, there can be ways in which they can process just what it's like to walk through the world. I know that actually my partner's daughter, who's multiracial, described walking into the Black Student Union at her school. And she said, I walked in on the first day and it just felt easy. She said, I could take a breath. And I think that for many people, affinity space feels like that for a variety of different reasons.
That makes a lot of sense. And I want to start by saying I'm genuinely not opposed to affinity spaces in, context dependent. I mean, I'm part of a men's group that I've been in for the past 5 years. It's been immensely valued to me. And that's because I genuinely believe that there are areas where men and women tend to think differently on average, And so it's useful to be with other guys and be like, yes, I derive immense value of going to martial arts, boxing, stuff like that. They're like, yeah, we do too. Whereas my female friends are like, I don't know why you like that, I mean, some of my female friends love it, I don't want to paint with a broad brush.
Right.
But that's value. And also, I mean, one of my close friends is Jewish. And so she's talked about affinity spaces for instance, children of Holocaust survivors, because that's just a different, I mean, it was a horrible thing to go to. But what she's described, that children of Holocaust survivors, for instance, they were raised by people who have this incredible zest and love for life, paired with this incredible mistrust. It's like, everything's beautiful. I love this moment. Your neighbors might try to kill you. Okay, flowers. And that's different. That's most of us haven't experienced that. So there's this immense value. Whereas when you put, non-Jewish people, or even people who aren't related to a Holocaust survivor in, there's a lot of oh, well, why do you feel it? Well, why do your parents do this? Why? That may not be useful. My concern with affinity groups is that my friend Angel Eduardo, he's a Dominican American guy. He's on the board of directors for FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. Okay. And he got really famous, among other things, for saying, Superman is my hero. Because, yes, I'm brown, Angel's brown, not me. But Angel's like, I'm brown, Superman's white, but who cares? That is the least important thing, because what matters to me is Superman's way of life, his values, the American way. Every time I act in pursuit of truth and justice, I feel like Superman, and the melanin levels are completely beside the point. And so he's fairly skeptical, he's very much on the kind of pro-human side. And for my part, I'm fairly on the pro-human side. Not that I think anyone's anti-human, but just in terms of, I worry that artificially slicing and dicing us into these different racial categories, I don't doubt it has good intentions. I think it can do some good. I worry about a society, I worry about unintended side effects where that might contribute to more racial animus or more racial division rather than the goal of, everyone seeing everyone else as human first. What do you think of that concern? Have you experienced that? Would you say that's unfounded, or would you say there are ways to work around that?
Well, I wonder how that feels different. Like, do you have that same concern with something like fraternities and sororities or men's groups and women's groups, right? Like, do you have that same concern for that, or does it feel different when you think about sort of racial affinity groups?
That's a really good question. I feel less concerned with men and women because there are biological differences there. And so there is, I think, genuine value in, okay, let's be with other guys, like, or be with other women. Whereas race is, it's sort of, we all have different experiences from our skin color, but race is also, we want to get to a place where those differences are as arbitrary as skin color and eye color. Whereas the difference between men and women, I don't think we'll ever get there because I don't think that biology necessarily will push us that direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And I think, yes, we know that race is a social construct, right? But I think for me, when I think about what I value when I'm with other women, and what I value when I'm with other white people, it's pretty much based on my lived experiences, right? And so, like, I was noticing that when you were talking about the men's group, you said that we think the same, and I think that, yeah, I mean, in some ways, I can speak to many of the women in my life, and I can speak to many of the white people in my life and say similarly. But I think I attribute that to our shared or universal lived experiences, and so I think, like, for me, in racialized affinity groups, I have not experienced anything where I'm watching I've only been in white affinity groups. So in the white affinity groups that I have been a part of, there's actually never been any hint of that affinity group causing a wider divide between those who identify as white and those who identify as BIPOC. And from the friends that I have, or the colleagues or the professional relationships that I have of folks who are holding space in BIPOC affinity groups, that generally is not, again, anything that is contributing to a wider divide. It's usually trying to actually figure out, how can we understand each other better so that we can actually be more connected, either in our fundamental day-to-day lives or in our more ideological or philosophical understanding of what it means to be in that other group.
I think that makes sense. And I think this may be a case of different implementations too. So for instance, when I was in Kenya, I spent a year living in Kenya before this. And for any listeners who don't know, I'm very white. But so I went to Kenya and I lived there for a year, and it was absolutely wonderful. Like, some of my closest friends I met there. And I had the great benefit of living in Nairobi, which is a very cosmopolitan city. So I made friends from South Africa. I made friends from Kenya itself. I made friends from Democratic Republic of the Congo. I made friends from East Asia and Western Europe and everyone. And we all just kind of got along. We all just, our backgrounds were something we saw. It was like, oh, I'm white, so I'm gonna get pulled over more often than you, because they think I'm rich, and they want to shake me down. So it's like, I'm going to get pulled over more often, but you're going to get stopped by security more often. It's like, we weren't blind to that. We saw that. But we never let it change how it treated us, how we treated each other. And then when I got back to the US, I would see stuff, and I swear it was the most surreal experience. I saw a Twitter sign in a very left-wing space, and it said, "Meet a Black person." That was the event title. And I was like, oh God, this is not progress. This is not you can't, this is moving beyond affinity spaces into different species. And I've read books, by fairly popular authors that sort of posit that sort of almost race essentialism, from people like Robin DiAngelo. And so it's maybe just like with DEI, maybe with affinity spaces, like we're almost talking about different things, because maybe they can go badly, but they can also go somewhat well.
Sure. I mean, I yes, like I don't think that I would sit here and say anything cannot go badly, right?
Yeah.
When it's being created by us as humans, we are fallible creatures, right? And I think, sort of that Twitter example, I think for me brings up something that's really interesting around the idea of affinity, or just sort of how we relate to each other across
Mhm.
lines of racial difference. Well, I agree with you. I think that whatever was happening in that Twitter thing seems like it was not it's not something that I would want to participate in.
Yeah.
I do think that so much of what I sometimes feel like is getting in the way of people in this country, in the US, to better understand sort of different racial identities is proximity, right? In the sense that
Mhm.
there are white people in the US who can go their entire lives without essentially meeting a person who's not white. And what does
Yeah.
that do? What effect does that have on our ability to then make decisions, think about how we want to participate in society? Just all of the stuff that
Yeah.
comes from living in a very insulated and dangerously, I would say dangerously siloed world.
Mhm. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it sort of reminds me of I write and research a lot about affective polarization. Research is a strong term. I'm not producing papers, I'm reading a lot of books. And so one of the things you see is this sort of siloing among a lot of Democrats, hang out in the same communities and go to the same coffee shops and go to the same schools and vice versa with Republicans.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of being pulled apart. And so there is a big danger of siloing. I guess race relations is such a tricky thing because with Democrats and Republicans, like, will always be different. That's sort of the point of having two parties. You don't want everyone to come together
Mm-hmm.
as just one giant monolithic party. Men and women are always going to be two genders. We can debate if there are more genders. I don't want to, sound like I'm discounting that, but there will always be at least two. With race, it's like there are a lot of people who have a lot of different racial experiences in the U.S. And Tim Scott, he's a Republican senator, I believe, possibly congressman. But he's talked about, he's a black man. He's talked about, getting stopped by police a lot for looking, quote unquote, sketchy, by which I mean he looks black.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never experienced that. And so we do have different backgrounds. But unlike with politics and unlike with genders, we're trying to move to a place where those don't matter. And that makes the whole thing tricky because race is the social construct that we're trying to undo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think the slight nuance that I would say that I would push on in what you just said is that
Mhm.
I actually don't think that I am trying to get to a place where race doesn't matter. I'm trying to
Okay.
get to a place where race isn't the most powerful predictor of certain metrics of success or happiness.
Interesting.
Right? Like I actually like my whiteness matters, right?
Uh,
It's what I grew up around. It affects how the world treats me. I think by discounting that, that's actually in my sort of worldview, that's like subsuming something that actually is real and a factor in my life. But what I am trying to work towards is, can we all move in such a way where we understand the system and we understand each other better, so that my whiteness is not a predictor of my success, my happiness,
hmm.
my wealth,
That's what I
my
mean. Yeah.
health, my longevity, right?
Yeah.
And then vice versa for folks of color.
Mhm.
So I think that's again just a nuance that I would say in terms of, like, I think race does matter, unfortunately.
Fair enough. And what I meant, and maybe you would agree with this, maybe not, but I want to get to a place. Yes, race does matter right now, I think. There is a case where like I don't get pulled over by the cops, and it's like ever, and it's really nice. And I've had African American friends say, "Hey, I think I was like turned down from that job like because of this," and it's like, well, that really sucks. I'm sorry. I want to get to a place where yes, everyone is treated the same, where your skin color has no bearing on your health, longevity,
Mhm.
friends, social status, income potential, job potential, stuff like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think we
Yeah.
share that goal.
Hmm. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
okay,
think,
that's what I meant.
yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think, but I think just to add on to that, I also, like, many of my friends who are not white also
Mhm.
love Like
Yeah.
many of my friends are like, I love my Blackness, and I don't want them to have to
Interesting. Yeah.
like let go of that, because
Yeah.
like I think oftentimes when we're talking about race in this country, it is unfortunately sort of essentialized down into, well, being white is a good thing and being Black is a
Mhm.
bad thing, right? And that is
Mhm.
very real when it comes to, again, some of these sort of major markers of violence and wealth or whatever. But then there's also the like humanity of things, of like, I think that many of the people in my life are like, this is one of the things that I love the most about myself,
Mhm.
who are Black. So I just also want to name that, like that reduce. That's why I wanted to call it that nuance for me, because it's sort of like I am working towards, in my tiny little way, of
Yeah.
how can we reduce um, the terrible deleterious effects of like hundreds of years of systemic racism,
Mhm.
so that race is no longer, again, that predictor. But I don't ever want it to be like where there is no race again,
Yeah.
because I think that that's actually a really beautiful part of our identities as well.
That makes sense. Yeah. That definitely makes sense. And yeah, I mean, I would perhaps phrase it a little bit differently in terms of my beliefs, but I think that our culture, where we come from, our heritage, that can be a source of immense joy and immense pride, you know? And I would certainly not want to take that away from someone. One thing I wanted to chat about, because I really want to get your thoughts on this. So race relations have actually, they seem to have declined a lot in the past decade. So I'm looking at a Gallup poll that says in 2001 or 2011, 65% of African Americans thought the relations between white and Black people were either very good or somewhat good.
Mm-hmm.
By 2021, that number had cut in half. It was like 33%.
Wow.
And I guess I wonder, what do you think's caused that?
Mm. I mean, I think that I think I will just state maybe the obvious truth of, like, I think that this country under the presidency of Trump became much more polarized in terms of explicit race stuff,
Yeah.
with, for lack of a more sophisticated term, right?
Mhm.
I think that I know that I sort of have discussed, and I remember reading in articles that while the sort of extreme hate that we saw under that presidency felt like it was all of a sudden like coming out, that many people were like,
Yeah.
it's been there for a while, it was just closeted, and sort of this leader unleashed something that felt like it could be more public. So I
Mhm.
think, to me, that has to be one factor
Yeah.
that I would assume is contributing to that. But I think it's interesting, like my brain wants to get underneath like how people interpret race relations. Like, I think that
Mhm.
that's such a general question. And I don't know if what you're looking at, there was anything sort of more specific, but it almost makes me want to like figure out what does that term actually mean? And how would that impact how people answer that question?
Absolutely. That's a really good question because I mean I had a little bit of training in politics before I became, political commentator. And man, the ways you can phrase poll questions, like you
Yeah.
can make a poll that will show every American's a communist, every American's a fascist. It's awful.
Yeah.
So here's the question from Gallup. N- uh, these are all direct quotes.
Yeah.
Next, we'd like to know how you would rate race relations between various groups in the United States these days. Would you say relations between white and Black people are very good, somewhat bad, or very bad?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, how do you read that? Like, when you hear the term race relations, maybe like, what does that mean to you? Or how do you think, how would you sort of like place upon a general respondent of this Gallup poll, how they might be sort of interpreting that, or how they're understanding that term?
It's a really good question. So if I were to answer as a white person,
Mhm.
um, I would think in terms of, well, all the Black people I've met and all the non-white people I've met are just very cool, really decent people. No one's ever tried to like mug me or, anything like that based on my skin color. At least not in the US. In Kenya, there were a couple of times where I was like, maybe. But, no one's ever, nothing's bad's really happened to me because of my skin color, because of the people of other skin colors. I've never felt direct animus, and I've also never, as a white person, I would also look at like I've never seen direct animus, and maybe that's just my own bubble. I mean, maybe if I went down south, I would see a lot more people just throwing the N word around like candy or something else like really awful. But I would answer that question in terms of, well, everyone I've met seems pretty cool to each other. All my white friends have like non-white friends who they really cherish and value. My non-white friends are doing really well. They aren't like kept down by apartheid-like conditions. They're doing like really well in their careers. And so we all seem pretty good. And so that's kind of the lens I would look at it, good or bad. That's kind of the factors that would go in to answer that question.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I think it just makes me really curious because I think some people would maybe answer that based on, like you said, very personalized experience of their
Yeah.
own, like their own beautiful little corner of the universe. And then other people might be answering that in terms of what they read in the paper or in terms of like statistics around crime. Like it's hard for me to figure out how to even interpret those numbers because
Yeah.
I just think that's that talking about things like DEI or whatever, the term race relations actually is one that might be really sort of incendiary for some people. And
It's
other
true.
people, it might just be like, oh, like you said, it's how I hang out with my neighbors.
Mhm.
But I do think that like I'm so glad that that's been your experience in terms of how you would personally answer that question. And then I do think I'm remembering back to like if I'm thinking about race relations, that we had examples of, some like sort of extremist white power
Yeah.
groups that were coming out in that time that people could turn to. I don't know. Yeah. So I guess my answer is I don't know. I don't know
That makes
what that
sense.
means.
Um, that makes sense. I do think so. I'll kind of give my like armchair hypothesis. I think first off, you're right about Trump. I think that actually got a lot of minority votes. It's something a lot of people don't realize, but he got more African Americans and Hispanics, votes than any GOP candidate since, in a while.
Wow.
And I mean, granted, like Mitt Romney and John McCain were running against the first African American president, so like that's going to skew things quite a bit. But
Okay.
he did appeal to minorities better than I think a lot of people, myself included, expected.
Mm-hmm.
But he also said a lot of racist things.
Yeah.
And I read an article in the New York Times that suggested that, I know a lot of Trump supporters. I love a lot of Trump supporters. None of them are at all racist. None of them are all prejudiced. Like they're wonderful people. But a lot of Trump supporters were kind of willing to turn a blind eye to his racist comments, or a lot of white Trump supporters in favor of like the good things that they thought he did. Not being Hillary Clinton being, I think, the main one. And so the analysis I read from the Times suggested like, hey, a lot of African Americans saw their white friends voting for Trump, turning a blind eye to these awful
Yeah.
comments, and thought, man, maybe we aren't as good as I thought we were. Like
Mhm.
maybe our friendship isn't quite as like colorblind as I thought
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I really appreciate you saying that. I think that really resonates. And I think the question that comes up for me is one that I sort of wonder, what does it mean to be like complicit in our racism, right? Like
Yeah.
you sort of said like I have friends who are Trump supporters, none of them are racist, but we know that Trump said a bunch of really racist stuff and they're turning a blind eye, right? And so I think that in some ways, like that's the exact thing that I feel like I'm trying to work with folks in white spaces around is like,
Mhm.
yeah, it is one thing to like burn a cross on your yard or be like blatantly and explicitly racist. For most of us, like I don't think that I know anybody like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think for the majority, well, I don't know. I think that many people in this, many white people in this country would agree with that. And then there are people who are like wildly leftist, liberal, progressive, are sort of on the other end of that. I think the middle is actually where the most change could possibly happen in that what would it be like if more white people weren't just turning a blind eye to the racist stuff that happens that we see? What change would that have for us, and what change would that have for the larger community? Because I think that is the sort of like complicity that many of us are having or moving through our lives with, because we don't want to ruffle feathers, because maybe we don't want to get into conflict, because maybe we don't care enough about it, even though we think it's wrong, but we don't want to step out of our comfort zone or whatever. Like, that's where the work actually, I think, needs to happen.
I think there's a lot to that. I don't think it's a monopartisan phenomenon, though. And this is where, like, I think there's a lot of that where, like, for instance, with Robin DiAngelo, for instance, I have friends who really like her book. Friends who like maybe grew up in the 60s and, kind of resonate with her and stuff like that. But I look at those friends, I'm like, I'm glad you get value out of this, but she has said some really racist stuff. I mean, in her book with Özlem Sensoy, Is Everyone Really Equal? They go pretty hard into race essentialism in ways that, I mean, my non-minority friends have been like, what is going on? Like, how, Or my non-white friends, I'm sorry.
I haven't read that. I haven't read that one.
Yeah.
I read White Fragility, and, I have feelings about Robin DiAngelo. I think you and I have talked about this. I think that the value that I place on White Fragility is that I think it opened a conversation for white people in a way that other texts hadn't been able to. I think that White Fragility, in the time that it came out and what was going on, and what, for whatever reason, that it landed on people's coffee tables, landed on white people's coffee tables more than something else, than any other book had in that way. And it opened a conversation. Yes. And then I think that Robin DiAngelo has proven to be problematic. For me, it's how she sort of has continued to center herself and her voice in sort of racial conversations, where I think part of like learning about our whiteness is figuring out how to decenter ourselves and actually let other voices be centered who know what they're talking about in terms of what it's like to be a person of color in this country, rather than saying like, I'm the white person, I'm the expert, and I'm going to just give space. So, but I don't know. I have not read this book. So I can't speak to it.
I'm not saying there's no value to it. My point was actually, it's sort of almost exactly like Trump, where it's like, you can get value out of it, but you got to turn a blind eye to some stuff.
I see.
And I kind of agree with you about DiAngelo. I don't, race relations is such a weird thing for me, because you want to stand up for the people you care about, regardless of how much melanin they have in their system, When my friend who has, two Black children, who I co-authored my Quilla article with about race relations, when he says like, I'm worried about the messages my Black kids are getting in school, I don't want to just be like, well, that's your kid's problem. Like, I'm white, you're not. You want to be an ally, but you also don't want to like. One thing DiAngelo did that really bothered me, when John McWhorter disagreed with her publicly in the Atlantic and said like, this is a really racist book. This is, the title was like The Dehumanizing Condescension of White Fragility was the title of his article. And she hit back and she was like, well, I think that's just a very disingenuous reading of his. And so it was very strange to see this anti-racist scholar, and this Black person tells her like, you're being really racist. And she's like, I'm going to ignore that. And so I think there's a huge danger of that on both sides,
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I think like, it's funny when you just said race relations, I was like, oh, what I'm thinking, what's sitting with me about that word now is that for me, the more important, or maybe it's a first step. It's not linear, so first is not right either. But that what became powerful to me was that it's actually first about racial awareness. That I have realized in saying like, it is my life's work to figure out how to try to confront like racism and inequity in all systems, but certainly in my own life in the education system. It has become so clear to me that the first and most important thing I need to do is actually figure out how I am a part of this, right? And so it's almost like that's what I appreciated about some of what was in White Fragility, was that it's just part of my learning of becoming more aware of my racial journey, of my racial identity. And I think that that's one of the things that I think is so important in terms of this conversation happening, like our conversation happening, and then more people talking across difference, is that for many white people, we first need to acknowledge that whiteness, that we are racialized people as well. It's something that I learned from Toni Morrison. It's something that I've learned from so many different voices, that because of the way in which our country was built on whiteness, that whiteness is considered normal, right? Like that when you say, oh, I saw somebody walking down the street, we all just assume that's a white person because you didn't say, oh, I saw an Asian person walking down the street, right? We only racialize identities that aren't white. And I think that for white people is one of the first and most important things that we all need to do in order to recognize and then find a way to build more awareness in service of then connecting with folks across difference more.
That makes sense. I really want to go back to something you said earlier, because you made a really good point and I sort of failed to acknowledge it.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Because your point about like we shouldn't turn a blind eye to the racist statements of Donald Trump or anyone else, And I sort of try to like both sides that, and like I sort of try to like defend my Trump loving, friends and family. But the truth is that I think you're exactly right. And I think the US would be in a much better place. And frankly, the Republican Party, which of the two parties is the one I way more strongly identify with, even if as a libertarian I'm not strictly Republican. The GOP would be in a way stronger place, and the country be in a way stronger place if so many Republicans had just said, you know what, Trump is over the line. He's beyond the pale. He said this about Mexican immigrants. He said this about black people. Like, I'm out. Clinton's not my favorite. I don't like her, but I'm not going to let the Republican Party be tarnished and be sullied and be tied to a man who will insult his political opponents based on their skin color, who will say derogatory names about Nikki Haley because she's Indian, who will say terrible things about black people or about Mexicans, will say about immigrants.
Everybody.
Right, everybody. The woman, I mean, geez, the number of women he's called ugly is awful.
That's just assumed.
Yeah, and I think the GOP would be in a stronger place if all the people who call themselves conservative, myself included, had collectively said, no more. We want a person of character to represent us. I don't like Clinton at all. Really don't. I don't like Biden very much. I liked Obama a lot, but I'm just very economically conservative. I think we should have held our nose and voted for Clinton, Biden, whoever, instead of let this crazy racist man who did some good things, to be fair, but we shouldn't have turned a blind eye to his racist statements. And as a country, as a party, we would have been in a better place if we hadn't.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I think, again, going back to affinity space, is that part of the reason is that many of us don't know how to do that. We haven't practiced how to disrupt or interrupt those statements, whether it's with our family members, whether it's with colleagues, whether it's with a politician, whatever. We actually don't have practice in doing that. And so I think I'll speak for myself. I can point to so many times that I have let something slide, or that I didn't say something because I got nervous, or I didn't want to cause a conflict, or I didn't want to make that person feel embarrassed because it was public. And I think that that's part of what I do with folks in affinity space, with white folks, is to say, like, how can we actually get some shared language and practice what it's like to do that? I mean, it's one hand to like vote, right? Like that's okay. So I just won't vote for that person. But the harder work actually happens in those spaces with the people that we love, whether it's around a politician, whether it's around something that was said on a TV show, whether it's around something that happened in the news or whatever. The hard work, I think that I've tried to commit to in my life and have been working with other white folks around is to do the thing, to be like,
Yeah.
and to have that, whatever's going on, like be aware of what's going on in our bodies. And then to say like, I'm going to do the hard thing. And I'm going to say like, hey, you know what you just said right there landed in this way. And I don't know if that was your intention, but this is the impact. And I just want you like, and to have that conversation, to slow down, to connect with what's going on in our bodies and have that conversation without knowing the outcome.
Yeah.
That's hard to do.
It is. Yeah. This is a case where I really like what Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff said. Because I worry that our discussion of microaggressions as a culture has kind of muddied the water in some ways, because you see, I mean, of course, on Twitter, you see all the far examples, but you see people of like, oh my God, he asked me where I'm from, I'm so offended. And a lot of that makes a lot of conservatives kind of like roll their eyes like, wow, that's the thing you have to complain about. Like, wow, race relations must be really good, you know? Like there is that thing of like, oh, if that's your biggest complaint, I'm sorry, but things sound good. And so what Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff said in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind. Did you ever read that one?
Mm-mm.
Okay, it's really interesting. I would recommend it because, I mean, granted, they're two older white guys, so there is that, but like, they're incredibly fair, incredibly reasonable, incredibly well-read, and thoughtful scholars. And they said, on the one hand, we shouldn't infer malintent from innocent questions. You know, where are you from? You know, stuff like that. Even things of like, can I touch your hair? It's like, that's a weird question, but I don't think they're like intending to be racist that way, you know? And so part of it's that colleges are sort of encouraging this sort of, oh no, like I'm going to infer the worst intent. And that's not great, you know, that makes us more fragile. But the other thing they said is there's nothing micro about genuine racial aggression, you know? And so when you hear, you know, again, I'm very lucky. I've grown up in places where it's like I don't hear a lot of that. But one of my friends, you know, recently said, most of my friends are derogatory towards the right and towards people in small towns because they're and so one of my friends recently said, like, yeah, I was in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. I'm sorry for the profanity. Feel free to edit that out. But that was the exact quote. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry, that's derogatory towards gay people. I was like, honestly, that sounds really derogatory towards rural people. I wouldn't want my hometown called that. And so I mentioned that just in passing, but I was like, you know, I'm not sure if I didn't want to make a big deal out of it because I don't want to like, I think sometimes if we guilt people too much, they can dig in their heels. But I also have that conversation like, I'm not sure I made you realize that would be like a pretty offensive thing for a rural person to hear, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about in your article when you all were talking about the things that college campuses were doing around language, like some of the words that they were saying were not okay. And I think that you know, I'm going to say something that you've probably heard before, but certainly in a lot of the work that I do in education or whatever, there's this phrase of like, you can acknowledge intent, or you can assume good intent, but you also have to acknowledge impact, right? And I think that when I think about language or things like, can I touch your hair or whatever, the intent is actually, unfortunately, not the most important thing. It's the impact that thing has. And I don't think that is being overly sensitive or whatever. It's acknowledging that like we're human. And if I walk into a space and everybody says like, oh, like actually, this might be a good example. As a teacher, I spent a decade teaching public high school. And so as a teacher, I would walk into like dinner parties with, you know, different types of people. And I would say like, I'm a teacher and people would be like, oh, that's so nice. Like, that's so good that you do that. And it immediately made me feel like I was an idiot and like that there was no level of respect for me as a professional and that what I do isn't actually like an art and a science and takes work. It was like, oh, you do that nice thing, you play with children. Now, they were not necessarily
oh God, no. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. They were not intending to necessarily, maybe they were, but I'm going to assume best intent. I don't think anybody was trying to insult me, but the impact it had was that I would like generally feel kind of shitty when I would go to these places sometimes, because I'd be like, I can't participate, like they're not expecting me to participate in conversation. There's just like this like unfolding, right? And so that's sort of like my own sort of silly example, but I think when you add on the layers of racialized things onto that, and somebody is hearing over and over again, oh, where are you from? The intent of that might be that then that person feels like, well, nobody feels like I belong here, that I have to constantly justify why I'm in this space. And, you know, like, so I think it's less about the actual words. Like, I understand, like, I don't want to play language politics. Like, I don't want to police anybody. But I think the key is acknowledging that there is an impact. And I will always remember, and then I'll stop talking because this is a long response, but I was in a meeting. I was in a meeting, you know, in education spaces, many of our meetings, we start off with like norms or agreements for the group. Like, how can we all be in this space together in a way? And it was a new group. And so people were like brainstorming different agreements, and somebody was like, assume best intentions. And I will never forget, because a Black woman who was in the room, who I know very well, said, you know what? It's actually not safe for me to assume best intentions. My lived experience has told me that you don't have best intentions when it comes to me. And so it's not safe for me to assume best intentions. And it was one of those moments, Julian, where like the air kind of left the room. Because I believe, if I remember correctly, she was also the only Black woman, right? So there's the only experience. I don't think it was all white people, but she was the only woman who was holding a black identity. And the air went out of the room, and I just remember being like, I never have had to worry about that. Like, as a white people, I actually have been able to assume that people have best intentions with me, and that has played out in my life. And so I think that there is this idea of intent versus impact that I think is a powerful distinction to make, that I think many white people haven't had to make.
I hear you. And yeah, so first off, my father was a teacher for 20 years. And so just on a personal note, I'm really sorry that you experienced that sort of like, oh, that's so nice stuff. That's awful, because teaching is very much art and science, and it's much more than like just babysitting. So yeah, sorry for that.
I appreciate that. I learned to shake it off over time.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of, I talk a lot about affective polarization. And this reminds me this sort of intent versus impact reminds me a little of that, because as someone who's not liberal but grew up in very liberal spaces, has very liberal friends, I've honestly dealt with a lot of nastiness. People call me a sociopath, an idiot, a warmonger. Wow. I don't know how you'd be a libertarian warmonger, but apparently I am one. I don't know. A peacenik, you know, naive, having the blood of children on my hands, you know.
Wow. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's corporate shill, you know, all of that stuff. I'm like, you just kind of brush it off. But like, these are all like people who would like consider themselves like close friends of mine. And so it's like, okay, partisanship, it cuts deeper than friendship in some cases. And yeah, I can't assume, and this was all, I'm genuinely not making a partisan point about liberals being worse than conservatives. I'm just trying to provide some context. But like, these were all liberals because that's the space I grew up in. And yet, in spite of that, I can't bring myself to, nor professionally can I let myself assume that all liberals may not have good intent towards me. When I meet someone who's very left, like you or a mutual friend, Monica, or someone like that, like, I have to assume good intent because they're a human, you know, and on the one hand, I've never been in physical danger from the people, you know, call me nasty things, you know. So there is that, and maybe that's more being male than being, you know, white. Because my female friends are much more self-conscious of like, hey, that guy might try something with me, you know?
Yeah.
But I also had to force myself to do what my friend Alexandra Hudson, she wrote this beautiful book called The Soul of Civility about how we can treat each other better. It's really incredible. Jonathan Haidt called it like deeply like meditative and thoughtful, I think, or something. It was beautiful. And she calls it unbundling, you know. She says, yes, someone from this group did something awful to me, and she experienced a lot of sexism in her life, and she's like, I have to unbundle that. I have to let go of that, not towards that person, but next time I meet someone who shares superficial similarities with that person, I have to not do them the disservice of carrying that old baggage into that new relationship, because that's not fair to this person who has nothing else in common with the other person except for a shared gender or race or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, what you just described is the essence of like, how can we become more aware of our internalized racism, right? And make sure that we're unbundling as much as we can. And I think so I think I'm like in full agreement of that. And I think that I hold that in tension with just the reality of if over time, so again, I'm going to make a story up right now, okay? Because I cannot speak for this woman who was in this meeting with me who said that thing that like I'll remember forever, and I'm going to make a story up from my own mind. But if over time I have been in meetings with people and assumed best intention, and then at one point lost my job because it turned out I was too aggressive for that group, right? And so you have these like multiple lived experiences. I think it's just, how do we live in the glorious tension of both and, right? It's like, yes, how can I approach every new human and try to interact with them at the core level of like, how do I get to know you? And how do I leave myself open enough to do that, but still also honor the experiences that I've walked through the world with and the wisdom that's come from that in terms of how I can keep myself safe and how I can, right? Like, I think it's that blurry space in between.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And I think it's a different answer for every person, because I mean, I've known women who were rape victims, who were sexually assaulted, who were, harassed by a lot of different guys. And so it's a very hard thing. And I would not try to do this, but it would be a very hard thing to try and convince them like, no, you should let your barriers down. Mm-hmm. And also there are other people who have had very good experiences who don't want to be told, hey, this person probably has malintent towards me. I shouldn't assume good intent. Like that can be its own form of kind of toxic. I don't think that's anyone's intentions. We're always trying to keep people safe. But I think it's got to be bespoke. It's got to be individual. It's got to be about kind of your own context and your own life.
I agree. And I think that in some ways that both and applies here too. I'm remembering there's this incredible organization called Aorta, and now I can't remember what it stands for, but it's like anti-oppression. It's a group that's working around sort of like anti-racist or whatever. People would say that they would probably be under the DEI umbrella. And they actually have a set of agreements that they suggest for more sort of equitable meetings or convenings. And for that one, they suggest the agreement that they suggest, which I often suggest, like will bring to groups that I'm facilitating, are assume best intent, but own impact. So it's like a both thing, right? Like we can come with this sort of like open heart, hopefully, open to things, but then you have to be ready to also acknowledge and own any impact that comes when those two things don't meet. So
I think that's a reasonable thing. And I think that's a really good way to approach not just race, but life in general. It's like, if I say something like boneheaded to my wife or my friend, it's like, okay, I didn't mean to sound that way, but I'm real sorry it did.
That's right.
We are coming up against, I actually didn't realize this until my wife came home. But we are coming up against the top of the hour. Is there anything else you kind of want to say to our listeners? Maybe like last 30-second statement.
I just actually want to say thank you to you. I think that I have been really moved by our conversations because, like you said, we come on paper, we come from very different viewpoints, and in some cases, maybe very opposite viewpoints. But I just have been really inspired by the way in which you and I have engaged in conversation, and I think that this is what I hope more people would be able to do, because I think that this is where we can narrow down that sort of what sometimes feels like a chasm, but I think it's a perception. It's a chasm of perception between folks who might have different perspectives. So I just want to appreciate you and thank you for this conversation.
Well, you're welcome, and right back at you. Thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. And yeah, as someone who I've only ever I've read the bestsellers of DEI and really not been impressed because I think I don't know. I think the bestsellers in any given movement may not be the most thoughtful members of that movement. And then I've had, friends who could kind of turn nasty sometimes over politics. And so, yeah, this conversation has been actually like really healing for me because it's like, oh, here's a DEI woman who really thinks these things through very thoughtfully and is way less of a caricature than the books I read. And we can just have this amazing discussion. There's much more nuance on both sides. And so it's ultimately what I kind of hope to leave our listeners with is that sometimes the most popular people in the world, or at least in politics, on conservative side, it's going to be like Chris Rufo or Matt Walsh, on the far left side, it might be like Robin DiAngelo, Olsam Sensor. It's like the most popular figures are not always the most nuanced and they're not always the most representative. In fact, they can often kind of be caricatures of the actual living, breathing people who espouse these ideas. I would certainly never want to be, tarred with Chris Rufo's name, and you're a much more nuanced thinker than Robin DiAngelo, I think. And so just my call to listeners be go out there and talk to people in real life who disagree with you because there's so much nuance and beauty and friendship like waiting to be had. And goodwill,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if we can all sort of like, I encourage myself on a regular basis, but encourage other people to like, we can just sort of adopt a mindset of curiosity. The more curiosity we move with, the better. And I feel like that's what I've appreciated about our conversations. And I hope that other people can sort of try on is to just like, how can we be more curious instead of more certain?
That's a wonderful way to end that. Thank you so much. Very last thing, is there any place that people can find you online if they want to follow you on Twitter or Instagram or find your website or hire you if you're a consultant or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm no longer on Twitter, but they can find me on my website, which is core-shifts.com. We can put it in their show notes if those exist. But yeah.
We definitely will.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abby. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, Julian.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.